Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome back to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Today we're talking about something I think is pretty cool, manure management, poop, whatever you want to call it. Ohio has quite a diverse array of livestock across the state, whether you're looking at dairy, poultry, cattle, swine, and all of that manure has to be managed somehow. We've mentioned water quality quite a bit in our podcast, and this ties into it for sure. So we've got a couple of our manure researchers with us today. Sam Custer is one of our returning podcast interviewees. He's the ag educator over in Darke County, and they have a lot of livestock over there. So he's been working with our other guest today, Glen Arnold, who's a field specialist for manure management for the state. So we really want to talk about some interesting headway they've made with side dressing manure, alternative application windows to address some of those environmental issues that also helps out economically and socially, and so we'll get into all of that. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
So you've been doing this research for quite a while, and it's come a long ways, and it's pretty exciting because Glenn, you've mentioned before that probably one of the first people in the country, maybe even the world, to do this kind of work with side dressing manure, but it started out, just on our research farms, whether that was Northwest or Western, and has evolved. So how about you talk a little bit about that evolution?
Sure. I can still recall when John Roush, John used to be the manure specialist for the state, involved me in my very first plot where we applied swine manure as a top dress to wheat. And that's probably been close to 12 years ago or so. And since then, we've perfected that a bit, and then we've evolved to where we're using swine and dairy manure to side dress corn, and getting very, very good yield results with doing that. And so we continue to want to work on new areas of the side dressing, but at this current time, we're pretty pleased with the results we've had so far.
So what did those first trials that you conducted look like?
Well, in the early years, we did some work where we simply took a manure tanker and we spread liquid swine manure on top of wheat about the 1st of April. And ground was dry enough to support the tanker. The wheat was growing. Wheat needed nitrogen, so we applied the manure at about 32 to 3,400 gallons per acre, and that provided the top dress nitrogen. And then we would, of course, have urea as our comparison in side-by-side plots. And we did those types of plots for 3 or 4 springs, and manure was never beaten in all the years that we did those types of research plots.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting. You've done that demonstration quite a bit, but I think it shows impact in that farmers were willing to let you back out on their field, because some of those pictures were
so true
cutting up their wheat as you tried to incorporate it a little bit as well. But like you said, the yield turned out as high as any of the other treatments.
Right. And then once we were able to go from using tankers to drag hoses, then the compaction issue went out the window, and drag hosing liquid manure on wheat is a fairly common practice in Northwest and Western Ohio, especially by the farmers who've done it before. They know it's going to work, and it gives them a window to put manure on top of crop that's going to grab that nitrogen and run with it.
Yeah, we know that that's one of the best practices that they recommend, is trying to get those nutrients onto a growing crop. So where did the idea come to try this on corn? Because that seems absolutely wild to me. So who thought of that?
well as it worked on wheat, wheat acreage has been on the decline in Ohio for many, many years. And if you thought of what crop could use nitrogen more than wheat, it would probably be corn. In Putnam County, where I live, we grow about 80,000 acres of corn and maybe about 25 to 30,000 acres of wheat. So we thought it would be fun to try that on the corn. So we essentially started with a small 2,250 gallon tanker. We modified it to travel down the rows of the corn that would follow the outer rows of a dual-wheeled tractor. And then we started side dressing little 90-foot plots with a 200 horsepower tractor and, to maneuver it in and out and to get into those little 30-foot openings that they had. It wasn't really pretty, but when it worked, the yields were pretty neat. The first year we did that, the manure yields were probably 25 or 30 bushel better than the commercial fertilizer yields that we got, and that really got us excited to start working on building better equipment to work with going forward. And then we ended up doing about 5 years of small plot research to get some really firm numbers on how we compare.
And Sam, this is kind of where you come in as you moved away from the small plots onto on-farm research. You came on board a few years ago, have a lot of livestock over your way, and really got into doing the on-farm research.
Yes, so Glen was doing the small plot research and sharing those numbers, and I was very intrigued with that as we saw the great responses with side dressing with the manure, and even more specifically with incorporating it. Glen could show you, a 25 bushel bump by incorporating the manure versus a surface application. So like I said, we have a lot of livestock in our area. And Glen came to me as a new educator and said, would you be interested in doing some on-farm research? And he had already talked with one of our farmers in the area that was willing to give this a shot, to go to whole field type work. And being naive and not knowing Glen very well, I said, sure. And so we came down, and I think it was probably the spring of 2013, and we brought a 6,000 gallon tanker down to Darke County. Glen did, and we started doing those manure applications with the Herod family, and it was quite interesting the first year. Everybody was in a learning mode. As we talked earlier this afternoon, the corn was barely up, the weeds were strong, and we didn't have the whole mechanics thing down on how to load the tankers out of the hog facilities. But we got it done, and we got some really good results.
At some point, there's some concern about taking the corn out with the drag hose. Mm-hmm. And you've been doing a little bit of research, not with the full field, I guess, operation, but some smaller plots. What have you found with the growth stages of corn, and how far along can that corn be before we start snapping it off?
Yes, we had when we did the whole farm plots for a number of years. We spent about 5 years running up and down Western Ohio with a large manure tanker before we began to really give thought to how we could go from a tanker to a drag hose. So we started drag hose plots back about 2012, and in these plots we basically have taken a 6-inch drag hose, filled it up with water, and we drag it both ways across a plot when we do a treatment. So if the corn is at the V3 stage, the field is dragged from east to west, then turn around and drag from west to east, so that we really hammer the corn with the small plot drag hose. So we did that at the V1 stage, the V2, the V3 stage, the V4, and the V5 stage for 5 years. And we recorded the data and the stands and stuff. And from V1 to V3, there was no effect on yield or population of the corn by hitting it so hard with the drag hose. At V4, you began to see a little bit of a dip in the population. We would lose about maybe 2,000 or 3,000 plants per acre at the V4 stage. And at V5, we devastated the corn with the 6-inch drag hose. We reduced the plant population by about 12,000 plants per acre, and we reduced the yield by about 50 bushels per acre. Wow. And that was pretty consistent each of the 5 years that we did that. So from that, we know that we're pretty safe to use a drag hose on corn at the V3 stage. And V4 is a little bit iffy, but still, like last year when we did several fields that way, it can be done. and get pretty good results with it. But V5 is definitely not appropriate for a 6-inch drag hose at this time. Now we are going to repeat that research using a 4.5-inch drag hose just to see if the corn could perhaps be one stage taller. The data we gather this year we may not keep, but at least we'll work the kinks out this first year and see how that goes.
I always think it's really cool. But I think what's even cooler about how much that corn can tolerate is the results that you're seeing in yield differences. You would think with a similar amount of nitrogen you would see similar yields, but that hasn't been the case. Can you talk about the yields that you've been seeing?
So in Darke County now we have 5 years of using the dragline hose to do our side dress manure application. And on a normal year, if there is a normal year anymore, our side dress manure is 2 or 3 bushels better than the typical 28 application on equal amounts of nitrogen. What we're really finding interesting is on those abnormal years, a very wet June or a dry period of time, the manure will really outperform the typical nitrogen. So we'll find maybe as much as 32 bushel the acre difference in 2015, I think it was. We had 10 inches of rain the month of June on the field that we were doing that research on, and that swine manure stayed with us. It's much less soluble, about half as soluble as the 28 that we were comparing it to, so it stuck with us and we got a really good crop out of that. So just really interesting information there, and overall over the 5-year period of time we're talking about a 16 bushel to the acre advantage of the swine manure over the commercial fertilizer.
And that's similar to what we found in the small plot research, especially on dry years, because you're incorporating a liquid. It seems to be equivalent to even though we're applying barely a 1/4 inch per acre of swine manure, it seems to be more like a 1/2 inch rain, because we are putting it in the ground, we're covering it up, and it seems to be there for the roots to take advantage of.
Well, that's pretty interesting. I think it really emphasizes the fact that manure is an excellent resource, and people have changed their minds over the last 20 years and realized that going from a waste product to a nutrient source, it still has its challenges with being difficult to move long distances. But I think with the drag hose, as you mentioned, compaction is reduced through that application method. And there's some opportunities for people to try this without making a huge investment, because you guys have gotten some sponsors. And is it 3 pieces of equipment now around Ohio?
Right. Ohio State is the owner of 3 12-row side dress toolbars. We have one from each of the 3 largest companies that operate in Ohio, and we keep these available for grant purposes. There's some areas we have to concentrate on and get done, but Auglaize, Paulding, and Crawford County are 3 counties that we've really emphasized. But we also have been as far north as Fulton and Williams County with our plots. Sam in Darke County has been about as far south as we've gone. Jason Hartshoot over in Crawford County and Morrow County, we've done plots there. So we've probably hit about 22 counties so far with these types of plots. It's a chance for farmers to use the equipment to work with their commercial applicators, so they have a hose and they have the pump necessary to do the work. But we like to do field size plots. In other words, we have a 40-acre field or a 50-acre field. We can side dress the entire thing, but leave some strips where we'll put commercial fertilizer in as a comparison. So farmers have that side-by-side comparison on their own farm, using their own management, and then they can have confidence that this will work. The other thing that we think that it'll lead to is, as time goes by, I think all commercial applicators would tell you that they are extraordinarily busy. Their phones ring constantly of people who need manure to be moved. I think as we go further into the future, I think there'll be more farmers, more livestock producers who buy their own manure application equipment. And I think if they can see this demonstrated, they can see this might be an option that really appeals to them in the future.
I think one of the things, the agronomic benefits of this are really cool. But I think one of the most compelling arguments for giving this a try is when you put the economics to it. Could you talk about that as well?
Sure. When you think of your livestock manure, it's going to cost you, close to a penny if you have a commercial applicator apply it to a field. It's probably closer to 2 or 3 cents if you do it yourself with a tanker on a per gallon basis. But when we look at side dressing corn, you were going to apply 150 to 180 units of commercial fertilizer that you bought. So if you paid, the going rate for that, you're probably somewhere between $60 and $75 an acre for side dress fertilizer. When we apply this livestock manure, and if we used a penny per gallon as an example, the cost then to have that manure applied to that field at a rate of about 6,500 gallons seem to be where we're at with most of our plots, then that's about $65 an acre to have that manure applied. So you would have spent all of that money on the purchased fertilizer anyhow, and you would have eventually have applied this manure at some point in the year, whether it be fall, spring, or winter, or whatever. So since you've got a product that has to be moved, and it can pay for itself as using it with a growing crop, then the economics are really, really strong. And we haven't really talked about the phosphorus and potash. It's also in the manure. And again, if you add those all up, you get an awful nice amount of nutrients from 1,000 gallons of any type of manure for the most part. But the numbers are there. It seems to work economically, and we think that's really an important part as we go forward, because everybody's searching for better ways to utilize a product that for many, many years was always a cost to get applied in the fall, or a cost to have somebody move it for you. Now we've turned that in, we think, to something that can actually pay for itself.
And there's been grain farmers who've put up buildings, I think, sometimes specifically for this nutrient resource. Or if you're a grain farmer listening to this and are intrigued by it and have a livestock building close to you, it may be a great opportunity to try, because like you said, Glenn, you're going to spend the money on nutrients anyways. Your research has proven that manure holds its own, if not better in some cases, than commercial fertilizer.
When we do the analysis and we look at the side dressing at the 6,500 gallons per acre rate that we've done with many of our fields, if you look at the P2O5, or the phosphorus that's applied with the manure, it's just about equal to the removal of a corn-soybean rotation. So if you thought that for the farmers that we're working with, if they were to apply manure every other year to a field as a side dress for corn, then the P2O5 in the manure, and the K2O for that matter, matches just about perfectly what a corn-soybean rotation will remove over a 2-year period of time.
Sam, you mentioned a keyword earlier, sustainability. And as we look at the economics and the environmental piece of it, and then the social component, you're in a large livestock area. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So when I think of sustainable, I think about a profitable system, because as we've heard in our extension meetings before, that if it's not profitable, it's not sustainable. So I think of a system that Glen just explained the numbers. Financially, it makes sense. From a total sustainable system, we have a complete nutrient balance here and a 2-year crop rotation. We have not only the N, P, and K there that we know we've got a package of loaded micronutrients that we're applying in that system. We are in a sustainable system where we're providing all of our nutrients that we need. If we apply it at the right times, we're not having to source other nutrients. And we talked, and Glen has talked, and we're having an impact. Soil and Water now tells me that our new swine facilities that are going up in Darke County are all appearing double wides in the middle of 250 acres, so that they can go into this system of applying 6,500 gallons every other year to match that sustainable system where we're not building nutrient levels in our soil. So I think that we've made great progress there, and as people look to doing things environmentally and economically correct.
Yeah, it's an excellent local resource of nutrients.
Well, we hope to continue with some additional research on this. The commercial manure applicators really like this window of time because it's a window that they've not traditionally been very busy. So this will allow many commercial applicators to add more total gallons through the same amount of equipment in a year. So financially, for a commercial manure applicator to become involved in this type of a project, it seems to work for them very well. So we think that's going to be good. And then to help them out, of course, commercial applicators need to drag fields at an angle to make their hoses work and stuff. And farmers, not all farmers are too fired up about planting corn to accommodate the drag hose people. So in our future, we have plans to start side dressing corn fields that have been planted at an angle. So the field will be planted straight, but the commercial or we'll come across the field at a 45-degree angle with a manure tanker, and we're going to incorporate manure and just see how that works. See what type of stand damage we would suffer, yield loss we would suffer. And the reason we do that is, as I talk with our precision ag people, if this works, that we come across these fields at an angle, the precision ag people could theoretically set up their corn planter to leave us a gap for our manure injectors as we come across that field. So they would still end up with the same plant population that they wanted. Let's say it's 35,000 plants per acre, but there would be those little gaps to let the commercial manure applicator come through, in the first 30 days or so that field's been planted. So we hope to look at that as one of our future research projects that we would like to get started pretty soon at South Charleston. And then another project we think we want to do that would help is at some point we want to begin to capture the manure when we make the turns on the end, rather than leave extra manure on the ends of fields when commercial applicators make that turn. We think we can probably put a 1,000-gallon tank on the front of a tractor and then divert that manure during the turn into that 1,000-gallon tank and then bleed it back out in front of the applicator as we go back down the field. So even though we've come a long ways, we think there's quite a bit more that could be done to perfect manure application with growing crops.
It's pretty cool.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
So guys, I'm not gonna lie. I think the science here is really cool. But I think what I like the most about this research are all of the hilarious stories you have from the times that things didn't go as you planned. So can you share one of your stories, your favorite?
Well, Glen is Mr. Video, Mr. Camera person. I think he ought to be on Rob Leeds' team at Delaware with all their videos and work. But it always seemed like Glen operated the tractor and I had the rod to unplug the tanker, and he would catch me knee deep in manure trying to fix the manure application tool, and I could never catch him in that mode. And as I've matured, I've figured out that Glen was smarter than me to know what I was getting into.
Why he really recruited you in the first
place.
place.
That's right. He just wanted somebody that was not very smart.
Well, yeah, you really can't work in this industry and not expect from time to time that you're going to take a bit of a manure bath. So we've all experienced that a little bit. It's pretty standard to just take a spare set of clothes along with you when you go out on these types of projects. And we've had a few things that have gone wrong from time to time.
Why don't you tell us about the Manure Science Review in Darke County way back when? You had the nutrient toolbar out of New York.
Yep. We were going to demonstrate that, and we just basically had a big bubble of air that got loose in that hose, and when they put the pressure to it to move the manure through the hose, hoses bursts off, and all kinds of things happened that day. Yep, that was Darke County. I remember that clearly.
I remember the headlines of the Salina Standard. So I've got something to affect the manure applicator goes awry or
run amok.
Run amok. There you go.
Yeah. We don't need to put that on the air.
It's in there. Well, to bring this back around, Glen, you do a great job managing a Facebook page. What are some of the resources people want to look at that, or other places they can go to get some of this information?
Well, we try to put most of our research and most of our data on our university Facebook page, and I believe it's called Ohio State University Extension Manure and Nutrient Management. But yeah, we're just about to 2,000 followers. So when I took over, it was at 35, I believe. So we're really growing by leaps and bounds. I think the use of social media has really benefited or has gained a lot of interest for this technology that we do, because we have people in Canada. I get emails from folks in New York, Iowa, Minnesota did their first research plots this past year, and they just, and actually North Carolina contacted us the other day. They want to start doing this type of work. So I think through the social media, a lot of people are, the first time they see that, they think this guy's nuts. But then as other people jump on and say, oh, we did this last year and it worked really, really well, we're going to do it. I know I talked to a farmer in New York that did 40 acres last year, and everybody was giving him grief because he posted videos on his Facebook page about it. Finally, he said, if those freaking Ohio people can do it, we can surely do it in New York. And then he said this year, their intent is to do 600 acres of this is surface application of manure onto a growing corn crop. But still, that's a step in the right direction. It's not the same as incorporation like we're doing, but it's a baby step to go where we think we want to go, and that is to get the manure on a growing crop.
Yeah, well, that's pretty cool that you're out in front of this and leading the way across the country. You do a lot with the corn newsletter as well, so people can...
Right. We try to put articles in the corn newsletter when they're relevant, like this spring, telling folks that they could plant their crop and could put the manure on top right afterwards. Because everybody is so jammed, we couldn't have a normal planting season. So as manure storage ponds continued to fill up and fields stayed wet, farmers were trying to make decisions on whether to plant first or apply manure first. So,
and I think we also have some research in the e-fields book that we hope all of you have on your office desks back home, and there's research results from Henry County and Darke County from our dragline work in 2018. Good information there to study.
Yeah, and if you're a farmer out there interested in some of this work, get in touch with one of us or your local extension educator, and we'll help you come up with a plan for sure.
Yeah. Thank you guys for your time and chatting with us.
Glad to visit.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.